Welcome to the Embodiment podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with specialists from around the world. I'm your host for today, Mark Walsh. So on the show today, Annie Brook. So Annie Brook is highly recommended to me, and I can see why looking at her website. She's ridiculously qualified for many, many years in this field as a somatic psychologist, as a therapist, body-mind centering. She works from the full sort of age range of people by the looks of things, from pre and perinatal right up to the elderly. Has worked with all kinds of organizations that you may have heard of, like Naropa. And yeah, really, really happy to have you on the show today, Annie. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad you're sharing this work with people.
It's putting it out there. This podcast is definitely putting it out there. How did you get it involved then? What was your sort of beginning of your journey with the body?
Could I say stress and trauma? You know, I was pretty happy and functional and grew up, thank God, I grew up in nature with a lot of ability to run around barefoot in South Florida. But I think actually my earliest impressions were what shaped later my interest in somatics, because I was born premature, which meant, and I didn't know any of this growing up because I was an athlete and I could function well. And it wasn't until I wanted in my mid-20s to dance. I moved to Berkeley, California. I thought, I'm going to become a dancer. And I tried to do what dancers could do, and I went forward or backwards or sideways. And it was the first time I had the experience that my body wasn't as functional as I thought. And I got a knee injury. And before that, I started studying with contact improvisation. I did neo-Reichian breath work and emotional release body work. And I started doing movement improvisation. And those studies that bring together body, mind, spirit in my mid-20s were what opened the whole pathway for me to the interest in somatics and how the body has a hidden story. Because my hidden story was related to being born premature. The last 6 weeks in utero is the time when you get folded into a nice little baby ball and you learn how to handle pressure. And so that loading in of meeting pressure and getting loaded like a spring gives you a kind of body power that then you can come out with resiliency and meet the world. So if people struggle at that early developmental time frame, they may develop a lot of compensations, which are great for survival. Ultimately, compensations are costly. And, people in adult life, they'll hit these breaking points where all of a sudden their world seems to fall apart, or, gosh, they were headed in one direction, but they just can't motivate themselves anymore. And understanding how closely linked the emotional body is to the physical body, is to inner beliefs and attitudes, is what is so exciting. So I got started by my early birth and attachment, and in my mid-20s, after I had a house burned down, my partner started drinking. it was like, hey, wait a minute, what's going on here? And I had what's called a wake-up call, I guess, a near-death experience maybe. After my house burned, I worked on a fishing boat off Cape Cod because I needed money. And I was so exhausted from worry. And I bet you find a lot of people in your field when you're working with executives or you're working with coaching where people have some kind of internal exhaustion or mental exhaustion. And the mental exhaustion really wipes away the coating of the nerves so that the brain doesn't function as well. And what happened for me was I had a fall off the top of the wharf on the fishing boat. And I had this bushel basket of lobsters. I was carrying up the ladder. I finally got up and over the cap rail. I took hold of the ladder and then I let go. And it was like, why would I let go? And I had no idea other than exhaustion, a kind of what's going to happen in my life, worry, anxiety. And in that moment, this was so palpable. I had the feeling of being held in love. Now, I know this will sound totally woo-woo, but I was working on a fishing boat. I wasn't woo-woo. I was a stoneware potter in Maine. I was very practical. But I had this experience. And once you have experiences that are from the inside out and through the body's story, you pay attention. And maybe it became a lifelong quest to understand, how does one feel that much love from inside the body? Because the second I let go, I started to fall, and it was like a 17-foot fall. And I was headed toward a water tank on the swordfish boat that had rebar welded on top. So that would have been a pretty nasty landing. And so my body did this sort of amazingly relaxed spiral. And in that moment, I had the feeling, if I survive, I'll come back. And if I don't, I won't. And then my body luckily, it moved enough to hit an old tire and bounce. And the second it bounced, I was back in my body, and I was like, whoa, there is a lot more to life than I thought.
So you had this super strong experience, and as a wake-up call, and then looks like you've embarked on just years and years of lots and lots of training.
Absolutely. And it became just a passion that I knew there was some expression of your soul through your body. Some expression of your nature. And the body, the nice thing about the body is it crosses all kinds of diversity lines. We're all the same under our skin. We've all got
shared humanity there, isn't there? Yeah.
Huge shared humanity.
So some of the things you've studied, body-mind centering, Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen's work. We had a British teacher on the show, Beverly Nolan from that organization.
Yeah.
Do you want to say a little bit about BMC and some of the other sort of major approaches you've trained in?
I would say BMC has been my go-to background. I'm a certified teacher in it, and I've studied it since my mid-20s. And it gave me the inroads to actually perceiving myself differently. We all have sort of a way we are and operate in the world. And with body-mind centering, I got underneath my compensations. And so I began to develop a sensitivity to perception, to being able to feel, how was I moving in my bones, my joints, my organs. And what BMC is brilliant about is it's from the inside out work. Yeah.
So it's exploring anatomy, but experientially. So I've signed up for some BMC trainings next year, and it's going to 4 or 5 days.
And doing that.
And it's like 4 or 5 days for maybe one system. So you might spend 4 or 5 days in the organs or on the muscles or the skin.
Yeah.
And then the other piece that seems big with BMC people is the developmental piece. And there's the systems piece, but then also this idea of really from conception almost, we're being formed. So this is something I don't know much about. I'd love you to return to what you were sort of saying earlier around how babies and fetuses even are starting to be those patterns or compensations, as you call them, are starting to be formed.
It's a wonderful thing to expand both compassion and awareness of energy, because it's so much based in the physicality. In a certain way, the embryo is developing its whole physical nature, and the cells are streaming and moving. But let me pause for a moment, because the key of it all is the self-awareness. And I think that's what I want to say about the field of somatics is you are guiding people to become more self-aware and not sort of egocentric. Not the ego self, but actually the self that can listen, perceive, stay grounded under pressure. And this is an ideal world. What starts in pregnancy is a baby can feel safe. The mother can feel supported. The father can be there supporting the picture. And, most people or many people didn't have that kind of beginning experience. They may have had a lot of early trauma they didn't even know about. And they were born and they survived and they moved along with life. And here they are in their adult life going, what's going on here? What am I curious about? So I call this taking adult behavior and looking for the echo back through the somatic body story to the earliest impressions, 0 to 18 months. And, my Birth Hidden Legacy really talks about, became so interested in this and in sharing it, I had to write about it. And I wanted to write in a way that gave people tools that they can use. And so in your work and in the work of somatics, what we want is to share tools that help people become more aware. And so the baby crawling patterns, what you're asking about, what happens in infancy, well, one is there's this whole physicality of curiosity, of exploration. What's out there? How do I get my needs met? And in infancy, that's the survival mechanism. A baby is so need essential, so interdependent, that they have mechanisms to be able to cry out, to reach, to take hold, to pull, and to soften and take in. So in my books, I call this the satisfaction cycle. And when someone is, I would say, imprinted, and we call this cellular imprint. It's like the experience of the cells gets encoded, and already adaptation responses are happening.
So can I challenge you on the cellular thing? Because I often hear people sort of say cellular, but cells don't work that way. Like you can't cellularly encode something, the nervous system can encode something, right? But you talking sort of metaphorically around the cells? I never understood this cellular thing.
I am not. I'm talking perceptually that what we feel is we feel the movement of fluids in the body, just like you can feel a wave if you were standing in the ocean. There's internal movement through all the fluids. And in the martial arts, they would say there's the chi. There's the movement of the chi, and you try to move with the chi or let the chi move you. But if you think of it on one level as fluid dynamics, a cell is expanding and condensing, and it has a semi-permeable cell membrane. And if we're guarded or we've experienced a shock, we're going to often rigidify. Then the cells don't communicate to each other. There becomes stagnation. There becomes less resiliency. And all those body systems that are supposed to work together aren't communicating. The nervous system then becomes the prioritizer. It is a major function, but it's not the only system that needs to be in communication. And in body mind centering, we have something called a nervous system reversal. So that means in health, if I sense something, then I could take in that information and respond to it. We call that the sensory motor loop. And that's a major, easy to train, easy to learn, hello, response. That's what we feel, hello, response. When that gets blocked, like hello, it's not safe to respond. Like maybe someone lived in a house where you couldn't express yourself, or there was so much chaos that it didn't feel safe. Then the healthy response doesn't happen. So that's right at a cellular level. And once the cells, because of mitochondria, the cells actually have oxygen. Mitochondria gives off water and it gives off oxygen. So in Body Mind Center, we talk about cellular breathing. But all of this, I don't want it to sound too far out there for what we're talking about, because we're kind of tiptoeing around all these different pieces. And again, the basic story is that impressions encode in the body tracks, there's awareness, and the body responds from a very primitive brain level, based on 0 to 18 months. And then things are built on top of that. So it's like our very first ability is the world safe? Will I survive? Will I survive in relationship? Is the primal organism's curiosity. And so, go ahead.
It's a pattern that's getting laid down, and you see this pattern is happening pretty early. I'm always surprised by sort of how early people from BMC say these patterns get laid down, sort of pre-birth and then during birth, and then, one maybe the first year or two. I generally hear people from BMC say. And
Yeah.
and those patterns are sort of then developed as we get enculturated and, as we develop.
Yes. And those are the like building blocks. We call some of the work the alphabet of movement. So anyone in your audience who's a movement, loves movement, to go back and learn primitive reflexes. That's when you touch a baby's hand and they grab. And that's just sensory motor. And that's the foundation. I've used primitive reflexes to help adults who had sluggishness in their body. They had places where they would go into a freeze response. Like if you have anyone listening who's in the trauma field, we study freeze and fight flight. And if someone's in a freeze response, they can't get their body to move. So a primitive reflex goes beneath the brain. You stimulate the peripheral nervous system, and it starts moving, and the movement is what brings the health. So that was my passion once I understood body, mind, spirit. I mean, after that huge trauma in my early years, and I started adding in these pieces of basically practitioner tools, improvisation, movement, contact improvisation. And I would say another huge part was the Sufi meditation practices.
Okay.
Because they were mindfulness training. And this was back in the 70s. I went to a school called Heart Song, and they had a Sufi practice, one where you would put your attention, like you'd put it in your shoulder, then you'd move it to your jawbone, then you'd move it to your knee. And so you're actually starting to expand the ability to have an interior landscape, not just respond to the external landscape.
And I guess that's the heart of all these different somatic disciplines you've studied, is the ability to build self-awareness, as you say, right? That you have that building that interior landscape.
To have self-awareness, but the other piece that's so key is to be able to respond to your world. We can become self-aware in a myopic way, right? It's like just too much. Or people can get trauma-focused, so they're all self-aware about their traumatic life. And
yeah, if I'm honest, the sort of American personal growth baby boomer scene for me seems like it has a lot of self-awareness and not much responsiveness. Like
exactly.
Or the crap of that kind of.
Say more about that. What do you mean?
So the idea of I'm really self-aware, I know my patterns, I know my stuff, I've been on all the workshops in San Francisco or Boulder, and they can talk all day about their patterns and what their therapist said. It's like, yeah, but what are you actually bloody doing in the world? Like what's your ability to respond powerfully in life?
That is the key. And I'm so glad we're talking about this point, because otherwise you don't take the risk of life. And you don't actually learn if you're not engaged in your environment. And so to bring that awareness into fruition means you mature past self as the center. And that's a developmental phase. So one of the keys of somatic healing, I would say, is yes, you go to early development and you sort of re-establish a foundation. But then you have to develop into learning how to stay an adult in reality, in life, and create functionality in your relationships, in your family, with your kids, in your work, and in your spiritual life.
Annie, how have you seen this field develop? Like, because you were literally doing this before I was born.
It was.
You were just about, I think. So, and you've seen it from a little fetus. If we think of the sort of 1960s baby of somatics that kind of was born in America, in Esalen and places like that. And, the first time the European body therapists were coming over, and, there'd been some dance movement therapy, maybe since the 20s or the 40s, but it wasn't really till the 60s it got going in the States. And, now it's quite a time off, places like Naropa didn't exist and Esalen was new and places like that. So how have you seen this kind of somatic baby develop over the last 30 or 40 years?
Well, back in the 20s, Otto Rank was looking at birth. He was a colleague of Freud's. And, in Europe, and he was looking at the impact of birth. And he said, most adult difficulties are stemming from what happened at that impression. And so there was Otto Rank, then Frank Lake, and the perinatal field grew up. The birthpsychology.com is a great organization for that. And the occupational therapy world was growing up with what is sensory motor balance, and the psychological world was growing up. So it started with more of the muscular skeletal work. That was with Alexander Lowen and the bioenergetics. Wilhelm Reich, a colleague of Freud. So in a sense, Freud said the ego is first and foremost a body ego. So he was aware of it. He just didn't work physically.
Yeah,
and
so Reich is student, and the neo-Reichians like Lowen, and now we're up to the sort of 60s maybe, and they're doing cathartic work, and people are throwing up in buckets, and they're doing hardcore de-armoring. So this is the sort of 60s, 70s kind of vibe.
Paradigm, and it was all with the inquiry of how do you get the whole person available for life, and not just the repression of culture or structure. And so I think we've got more and more refined over the years. And I came in at a perfect heyday of, there was the expressive work. I got to open up from all my worry and start moving energy through my body. And there was the play. I mean, I think I'm fortunate because I have the unique gift of the playfulness, which comes from improvisational, like contact improvisation is, to me, the one of the best ways adults can play together.
I love it. We had Martin Keogh on the show not long ago as well.
Oh, yes, exactly.
Yeah, we had we've had some contact teachers from Israel as well on, and that playfulness adds a lot to embodiment. And in some ways, it's quite, you don't think of Freud as being playful. It's quite counter to a lot of, if you meet therapists who aren't body people, playful's not always the first word that comes to mind.
Yeah, but the play is how we grow and heal.
Right.
How laughter can help us get through things.
That's what I'm just going to interrupt. So I want to underline that. Like that's a profound statement. Like, play is how we learn, which is literally true of a baby, right? But also as adults, if we're playing as opposed to being stressed, we were actually going to learn. But also how we heal. So it's like, why aren't our healing spaces playful spaces? There's a few clowns in hospitals maybe, but like that's a profound statement.
Well, I was fortunate to study, and this is a European guy, Giovanni Fussetti, has Red-Nosed Clown, and I've taken his workshops, and I use clowning as part of psychotherapy. Because if you can laugh or empathize with an aspect of self and exaggerate it, sometimes it becomes so ridiculous that you can love it. And this is where, that we're going all over the map because we're looking at body, mind, spirit here. And my path, I couldn't just go down one channel. I had to work with the movement, and body, mind centering is a movement-based modality. It comes out of occupational therapy as its origins. And Bonnie grew up in a circus, so she watched incredible movement artists. And her mother was a dancer on horseback. So that the lineage of that, of movement, of creativity through the body, and then the lineage of improvisation, where contact improv, you have to listen. And it kind of blows away all those phobias around push and pull and touch and pressure. Instead of being isolated in your own little box, you are engaged with other people, and you're getting information through your hands and feet, not just your eyes and your verticality. You're getting information by being off balance and rolling and turning and laying over a ball. So movement is learning, movement, and then we have to go to the painful aspects too. If we don't address the pain, then we can have stagnation in the body because we're compensating, we're avoiding certain events that were overwhelming.
And it does seem like people lean towards either the playful side, like they take up improv or contact dance or comedy or clowning, and then there's the people that lean towards the trauma side. and they're looking at the psychological pain. And there's been this whole trauma revolution since you came into this, right? Like, you know, it's become a much more wider known field. And they tend to be not so funny, those people. Like, they tends to be like less interested in the playful side.
Yeah, and the trauma, the only reason to even work with trauma is to heal, not to carry it around like a banner. So going back to birth trauma, I help infants and parents reestablish relationship. You know, or I worked with a 6-week-old and I watched her go from being furious at her mom because of a C-section to being totally sad because she missed her mom, to being terrified, and then completely forgiving her mom and settling into her mom's body. You know, and this was all in the space of 20 minutes. So that ability of the emotions impression, you know, the amygdala is our survival mechanism of the brain. And it's going to lay down patterns. We're not going to get up to our higher creative brain. So studying the infant development, I had a focus of the brain itself. You know, what part of the brain is awake with different movement patterns. And so what I want to say to that is we don't want to engage just the higher nervous system. We want to engage the peripheral nervous system, the grounded ability. And that's why infant work, where you're lying down on the floor, learning from a horizontal position, is really key for the building up through the brain stem. And so in my classes or my workshops, I'm taking people back through early developmental patterns, but then we're rising into adult cognition, you know, so that you don't get stuck in the infantilized me, what are my problems, or what are my patterns. Now, the place where a psychotherapeutic container is helpful is the ability to, and this is actually the work of pre and perinatal we're going to talk about now, the ability to slow down. We go usually 10 times faster than what the body can integrate if there's a high emotional charge. Unless we're moving and playing, because then we're integrating at a much bigger, you know, processing speed. But in the rest and digest side of the cycle, we need that ability to slow down, look around, absorb. And my experience in Europe, when I taught in Switzerland, I was with David Sawyer and we were teaching aquatic therapists how to, for 5 years, how to recognize pre and perinatal shock when they were doing water sessions. Because if you're treating someone and they go into a shock response rather than just a present response, they can look like they are deeply, deeply relaxed, but they're dissociated. Mm-hmm. And charisma has that same possibility. Someone who's teaching from a high charismatic place can actually be dissociated.
Say more about that. What the first one made sense. So someone who's charismatic is giving out a lot and not really feeling themselves. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. And in the pre and perinatal psychotherapy, I've worked with, you know, big CEOs and, you know, they're doing this huge work in the world and their personal life is a mess. And it's like, what's wrong with that picture?
Yeah.
And then when we get down to the cellular imprint of early experience that overwhelmed the body, just like I had that fall where I left my body, you know, and it was a wake-up call and I felt held in love. It was also a dissociation. And that taught me that the body under stress will dissociate. Mm-hmm. It's a survival mechanism. The embodiment work is to gain the benefits of that ability and to come back in and face the reality in your own experience and integrate it. I call that digesting an experience, metabolizing the stimulation in the cells, befriending, and then you start to uncover self-belief. You start to uncover identity beliefs. And I would not have guessed until I did so much clinical work, personal exploration, but also clinical work with 4-year-olds who could talk and 6-year-olds, that babies will develop self-attack thinking. And I don't know how many of your people you work with under stress either blame others or self-attack. or self-doubt. But there's this high attack energy from the nervous system. And that is the fight response. That's only one side of a coping mechanism.
And how, people that have had these early childhood experiences that were difficult and they've ended up in this sort of slightly wired nervous system.
Yeah.
Like, how much hope is there for people like that who have really...
There is great hope. I want to say there's great hope if they're willing to do the work and they get the right kind of intervention support. And that's what I'm hoping to share, with how you take your work into the world, or anybody listening. It's like holding the seat where you're going to address the physicality, the playfulness, the emotional pain, and help the body and the brain reconnect. Now we'll talk about the polyvagal theory.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it seems, it seems like there's all these different modalities now. And a lot of students, I'm not a trauma specialist, though I was one of my mentors, and a lot of people will sort of say, what's the best thing, Mark? What should I get? Should I get EMDR, somatic experiencing? Should I do the TRE? Should I do this and that? Everybody's telling me their own approach is the best. So if you talk to a TRE person, they say TRE. If you talk to somatic experiencing, they say somatic experiencing. Like, it's pretty provincial right now. Like, everyone says what they do is the thing to do.
And I'll tell you, I've had somatic experiencing trainers come to see me. And that's because, and EMDR trainers come to work with me. And the key is they often don't have the movement. They'll have, EMDR, you'll work with the brain and the eye movement, but they'll take that into the relationship to gravity, the movement through space. Or the sensory experiencing, they'll have an understanding of movement, but they're always watching themselves. They're in a part of the nervous system that is not necessarily being, but it's kind of watching. And that is not the same as being. And so to answer, I say, whatever your soul guides you to, try it. But ultimately, you've got to come back down the brainstem to rest on the earth.
Uh-huh.
And that's where, as we're a culture more and more removed from manual labor, from the physicality of experience, we lose a kind of perception or instinctual responsiveness. And so I would say to people interested is get a breath, get a breath that includes movement, includes play. And not just the improvisation that's all about ha 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 thing.
Yeah.
Always too funny.
Yeah.
But the one that actually where you start to feel the heart open and you feel the empathy.
Yeah. I also just have this question of most people suggest quite a bit of work. I'm lucky I can afford a therapist who I see once a week, and that, for a number of years. I just kind of wonder, how much of this is really, if we live in a traumatized world, how much of this is really accessible for most people?
Well, that's why I wrote the books I wrote. My first book was on contact improvisation and body mind centering. And the reason I wrote it is I lived in Taos, New Mexico, and I had a little movement studio, but Taos is out of the way. And teachers don't come through Taos that often.
Sure.
And I thought, this stuff is so much fun and so healing. How can I help somebody in Podunk, Nebraska, get to be able to play with their friends?
Yeah, this is what I love about the internet, right? This podcast is going to go out to a few thousand people, and the Embodiment conference we've got on will go out to a few thousand people. This is pretty cool.
Yeah. And so I was supposed to go dance with friends. I hurt my back, and I just sat down in a weekend and I wrote how can you do contact improv? And so that idea that we can share this, there are resources, and if the main resource is getting people to play with you. Like contact improv, you have some self-awareness pieces you do, you and gravity, you and the floor, you and rolling and turning. But then you get other people moving to move with, and you have a little manual that helps you decide how to do it. And there you go. You're off and running. And contact improv is a very inexpensive underground community that's worldwide.
Yeah, you can afford to turn up to a jam, and it doesn't have to be the same as this, like a quarter of the price of a therapy session, and it's spread not everywhere, but it's pretty, it's pretty broad.
Pretty broad. And then, that in itself will start to build health because you're moving, you're with community. A lot of, the social nervous system, the polyvagal theory, we have healthy social, and we have healthy recreational excitement and play, and we have healthy rest and digest. So getting in a social field that can play brings a lot of health to the foreground.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And as you come inside the body, and this is what happened to me, I thought I was fine until I realized that my body couldn't do what other people could do. That opened my curiosity. And so then I found, first I found an article in a magazine, in Contact Quarterly. I read about body-mind centering. And then I went to a 3-week workshop, where I just stayed in that body-mind centering learning style. And we used to, back in the 70s and 80s, much more immersive learning.
This has really changed. This is the same in business. They used to send leaders to a 4-week business workshop at Ashridge or Roffey Park. These are the big management consultancies in Britain. And now it's 2 days if they're lucky. It's really changed in terms of this, and courses, like if I see a 5-day course for BMC, I'm like, wow, it's big. And the 3 weeks, this is hard to imagine almost in the modern world, the bite-sized learning.
I don't know how to do this. How can we get people to learn somatics when you have to experience it?
Yeah.
And so the Conception to Crawling book, you're like, you go back and you crawl. You actually get, I went down on the floor and I crawled for like 9 months. I still walked and everything, but I had a crawling practice. And doing that literally changed my brain. I went from having a pretty, I love mental acuity and creative and all that. But I went from having a really high, nervous, in a good way, creative world, to actually feeling the ability to rest into myself at a deeper level. So I wasn't just drawn out in excited, creative ideas, but there was this ability to rest into the primitive brain, the back brain, and crawling.
It can take a bit of time, can't it, as well? It can take a bit of time.
It can take time, and to be patient.
Yeah.
And maybe there's a part of it, who knows, but maybe it's the path of the practitioner.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of us are in the householder world. We have jobs, we're working, we're not the mystics on the mountain. And so how do you bring enough of it into everyday life?
Yeah. Yeah, I realized the other day quite a few of my colleagues don't have children, like disproportionate number compared to the population. I thought, okay, well, that's interesting. A lot of the famous yoga teachers who are traveling around the world don't have children because it just wouldn't fit. Some do, but I'd say a disproportionate number don't. And it's a different challenge, isn't it? Like being in the world and busy. People have got busier and busier over the time that you've been practicing. I've seen it in the 10 years I've been doing this full time, the 20 years I've been practicing it. I imagine even more so from before that, again, I see evidence for that, like longer courses in the past and things like that. What else have you seen change over the years then? So we talked about the 60s and 70s and the sort of cathartic stuff, and then there's sort of more neurological kind of trauma stuff coming in later on, maybe from the 90s. Have you seen any other major changes? Or I guess the thing I'm sort of looking at is integration. Like, so if I'm in Boulder, right? You're in Boulder, which is absolutely fantastic place to learn about embodiment. You could spend 10 years there and still not have done all the workshops, right? Like if I went to Boulder or Brighton where I live, or Byron Bay, or, these kind of Berlin, these kind of hubs, like, where would I even know how to start? And, one answer I get is you just, whatever calls you, whatever opens your heart, and that's valid. But like, is there another answer of like where to start in the modern world?
It's a great question. And I guess the first thing is to start without having to know perfectly where to start.
Yeah.
The truth is this is a good topic for our theme here. The modern world is overwhelming.
Yeah. And it can become one more thing on the to-do list. It can become one more thing to have achieved or consumed.
And with the electronic media it overwhelms the visual field, the flat screen. It doesn't, you're not really like you and I love talking with you, but we're not smelling.
It's not the same as if I was there. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're missing some of our perceptions. And so how do we make sure we get enough interactive perception where the nervous system, ideally you want it for creative thought, and you want the body integrated somatics to be there with your expression and everything. So where to start is your question. And I would say, find out your birth history. That was the beginning. If you don't know it, start having a practice. Becoming curious, like, wow, imagine. I call it primary scenarios. And in my Birth Hidden Legacy books, you can write them down. Like, what was my conception like? What do I met? What time of year?
Yeah, I don't want to think about my parents fucking. But I mean, like, I asked my mum about my birth, and she said she can't really remember. It was a long time ago. So
right, yeah. The thing is, and I agree with you on one level, who cares? And aren't we privileged to even go back and take the time to think about that, right? There's two things. As an advocate, I would say we need to really, and Europe is much better than, the US is horrible at this. The post-birth care of infants and the attending to babies and moms. Like it's European, some countries you get, I think in Denmark, they get a year leave of absence to parents.
Yeah, maternity leave in Sweden and places like that can be up to a year, and even paternity leave in Sweden as well, up to a year.
Yeah, that time frame with supportive tools. We don't want, a depressed mom stuck at home with an infant. That's not going to work. But what we want is the resources available for 0 to 3 is when you're shaping the resiliency.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I just had an interesting thread on my Facebook wall talking about modern technology about parents who regret having children, and it's sort of a taboo subject. And a lot of people say, look, I really love my children and blah, blah. I don't really regret having them. But just the absolute exhaustion of the unsupported, usually mother, not always, but usually the unsupported parent. A lot of them were just talking about being exhausted and sleep deprived and not having that extended family to look after the kids and needing to have a second income for the household. So it wasn't like even they could look after them. It was like they just had to go out and then, do sort of like a second job basically on top of the other job they had. And, just hearing a lot of hard stories actually on that Facebook thread.
Yeah, and that's, I certainly don't know the answers for that, but the mothers who are feeling overwhelmed, the mothers I've seen who found a successful way through that is they take time in the moment to express themselves. They don't hold on to things. They break dance on the kitchen floor. They're doing stuff to stay embodied. And bless us all. We need children in the world. We need the continuing evolution of the species. And I work with a lot of parents, and many of them we went through a phase of too much trying to be the kid's best friend.
Yeah, that was an American phrase. And definitely when I was out there, 10 years back, I was shocked at how some children talk to their parents in the States. They was
not good.
Yeah, their parents had lost the authority.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest problems in American culture is the parents are afraid to set limits. Mm-hmm. And we're specializing individuals at the expense of culture, at the expense of society. Uh-huh. So children are becoming so egocentric where their needs are stronger than anything else. And so everybody's adapting to them instead of them learning how to adapt to the world.
Yes, it's a culture of narcissism where they expect the world to be sugar-coated and non-triggering rather than actually learn the robustness of handling a difficult world. And I think in some way, this sort of the conservatives have sort of been the ones leading the way on this. I actually see in the States of saying, well, hang on a minute, you can't be so sensitive that you can't handle life. I mean, you can't take off books off the college campus that are going to upset you and burn them. It's a sort of very strange situation out there. I particularly see in Canada and the States that's spreading to Europe. I was just in the Netherlands. They have it a bit as well, actually. But that sort of increased sensitivity and inability to self-regulate is
right.
There you go there.
Yeah. And so back to how does one get started? You can look at your adult life. And I call this, what are the phases of birth? If you want to use the earliest impressions, birth is one of the biggest somatic experiences that we have. And it teaches us to meet pressure. It shapes us to engage in something, to follow through, and then ideally to rest and digest. That's the healthy cycle of the nervous system. To feel energy, to take action, to follow through, and to celebrate. And so the cool thing is there's just a few little tools that people can start to use on an everyday basis that are movement-based that you can tell your readers about. One of them is in my Conception to Crawling. It's called the satisfaction cycle. And it's developmental actions of the ability to yield, then the ability to push, the ability to actually reach out from yourself to come into contact with something, to take hold, to pull, and to yield. So you could count them on your fingers. Yield, push, reach, take hold, pull, that, and then you absorb back into yield.
Show me yield again, because that's maybe the hardest one for people to conceptualize who are just listening to this.
So hard. Even in Switzerland, we couldn't find a word for it.
Yeah.
The German language. We finally found one. I got my book translated into German.
There's no word for yield in German. And so show me it again. I'll see if I've got a description for the listeners as well, so we can kind of give them a audio.
Yield is the ability to find balance in your nervous system. So the way we learn it, the first level, if you actually let yourself go down on the floor and feel your whole front body against the earth, you start to soften. And then I have people experiment with getting really tight and realizing their breath stops. They actually don't feel the support of the earth. They're too internally taut. And then I have them go really collapse. Lethargic, exhaustion.
Yeah.
And those are the two extremes of the nervous system. And so then you lie on the floor and you go back and forth until you find the middle.
Great. Contrast's a great way to learn with somatically, isn't it? Going to extremes and feeling out the difference.
Yeah. And then what yield means is, say you were really agitated and excited about something and you were sharing it with me. If I got all agitated and excited with you, I might be exhausted, or I might then get mad at you or something as a counter response of protection. Instead, I just yield. I stay present. I widen. I let my field get big enough to experience the energy that's coming to it instead of contracting under pressure. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Very Aiki from the Japanese model. And okay, let me ask you a bit of a wild card question here then. So I want to bring some of this to life for the modern age. If Donald Trump walked into your office for a session, what would you work on with him?
First off, I would say, hi, welcome.
Okay, so connect, first of all.
Yeah. First, I would connect, because from the get-go, and it doesn't matter to me who's in political office, but from the get-go, someone who got there and as the president, you're supposed to actually follow their leadership for a while. And in his presidency, he was under attack before he, from election day one.
I mean, one comedian got in a lot of trouble for saying, give him a chance. And the famous comedian asked, I was like, well, that's a fair enough thing to say. I mean, he might be absolutely appalling, but that seems a fair start.
And it used to be common standard polite behavior to give them a chance.
Yeah, the polite behavior's gone out the window.
It has gone out the window. So I would first off say, hello.
Yeah.
Wow, thank you for looking at taking on such a big job. And then I would say, let's start looking at what your stressors are.
Okay.
And then I would want to be able to help him feel I would want to actually assess him from the satisfaction cycle.
Okay.
Is he more organized in pushing?
Yeah.
Or does he reach, how does he reach and take hold and pull?
Yeah. So let's just go on. This is some really great ways to learn about what you do here for me. It really brings it alive. So first of all, I look at someone like Trump. I think you're incredibly stressful position and very little ability to handle stress. Like, that's bad. That's like, I can kind of feel sorry for him at that point, right? I can stop hating him and go, okay, well, that must be tough. And then I also see someone who kind of can't be satisfied, right? There's a quality of sort of pulling in towards him, but never being able to really take it in and get enough. Is that your sense, or is like, does that?
I don't know him personally, so I can't.
I'm making stuff up here. I get. This isn't professional assessment.
Okay, but what I would say is, I want people to know the satisfaction cycle.
Mm-hmm.
That they can feel satisfied and they can feel nourished, and then they can push against the earth instead of having to push against another person for their support.
Mm-hmm.
And then you push down, you ground, and you reach out and take action. And so you have to take someone's skill set of what they've already got, and then you add more resources to it.
Okay, so you start where he's at. You say, this is what you can do well. Let's add to that, rather than sort of making him bad and wrong.
Of course. I mean, who wants to be under attack?
No one, but if you're president, it's going to happen, isn't it?
It is. And, it's probably goes with the territory, and you have to be able to still handle the pressure and follow through.
Yeah, that ability to handle pressure for anyone in a position of leadership. I feel that myself, just organizing a fairly large conference right now, and it's like, blimey, that's a minor pressure compared to leading a country.
Right, but good for you for taking it on, because you're going to grow. And what I would say is, as you're organizing it, one of the key nourishments of the satisfaction cycle is you take hold of something, you pull, and right there, you're coming into relationship.
Okay, I literally just did that with my wife.
Okay, good.
Got in from work, I pulled her close and gave her a hug. I also spoke to the manager of the conference, and it's 3 weeks now, and she's starting to get a bit stressed. And I said, listen, Daniela, you've got to prioritize your self-care. She said, what's our priority? That's a good question to ask your boss when you're overly busy. And I said, self-care. I said, we've got 3 weeks to go, Daniela, and if you explode, this is not a good thing for anyone.
Right.
And I definitely see that being an issue for people that have pressure put upon them, is just not taking that. I took an hour or two this morning to wake up and do a bit of practice before I jumped on a plane.
Good. And even the simple things of 5 minutes of moving all the muscles of your face.
Okay, nice.
Fingers, right? Blinking, opening your eyes wide and your mouth, because many people get into a frozen face. Exactly.
You can do a little face dance, like face dancing. So, gurning. The art of gurning, we call that in England. Most foreign listeners won't know what gurning is. But
good. Yeah, a little gurning could be helpful.
Okay, so facial dancing. What else? Give us some other top tips for sort of people under pressure, whether they be me, Trump, Daniela, or anyone else.
Stand up and push against the wall.
So you feel this.
Take some of that pressure and get some response back into your proprioception. Feel yourself, so that you're not just a mental, construct designing something.
Yeah. So if you're someone who tends to space out, that's a particularly good one, isn't it? Like for the people who tend to dissociate a little bit, it's like feeling your press ups, star jumps, wall pushing, sort of musculature kind of stuff. Yeah.
Getting embodied again. Another one I think is so great is to brush up and over the top of the face and head and brush your neck.
Okay. And what is that? Just kind of like, people do that naturally, don't they? When they're stressed, they'll kind of go, oh.
Yeah, right? Because you're using touch.
Uh-huh.
And if you go back along the neck, there's so many nerves right in there that come right out of the brainstem. Right out of that vagal nerve comes down.
Strikes me that just allowing ourselves to do stuff we would do naturally anyway, like people self-stroke, they self-massage, they shake. There's lots of things that we kind of do naturally that actually we just allowing ourselves to do them is often the best thing, right? That's a very small kind of listening into the body.
Yes. And this will sound odd, but picking up babies.
Every chance I get. Dogs and babies. Every chance I get. I love them. I love them. Dogs and babies.
Exactly. Put them right on your chest, and have that feeling of weight. That's why some people, they'll put their pets, their cat, right on their heart.
Weight on them, don't they? I've had a number of girlfriends that used to like me lying on top of them, and not to turn them on, but to relax them.
Yes, this is yield. And so in the I just published a book. It's not out yet, but it's to help parents who have overly sensory kids.
Yeah.
One of the exercises is called I used to call it squishy bug. It's like you literally want to have your kid folded in your lap and you're loading in pressure.
My niece has a lot of this, so please do email me any kind of good resources or things that you know so I can pass on to my sister.
Oh, definitely.
But she likes strong hugs from me, and I feel like that's one of the kind of, she like quite physical, you know.
Yeah, very physical. And, you know, I don't know, but some kids who are born C-section, they never got the pressure.
Got it.
All the way through their joints.
It's a big thing for autistic people as well, isn't it? They have these squeeze devices, heavy blankets. And
that's why, what's her name? Temple Grandin, you know, designed a squeeze box for herself.
Yeah, she saw the cow being squeezed.
Yeah, but I have friends do that. And contact improv, you can get pressure on your joints.
Yeah, it can feel good. It can feel good, for sure. Yeah.
So even in, you know, what I say to couples, that, most couples, their physical interaction is like sex or dancing.
Right.
At least there's dancing in addition to sex.
And a lot of people ain't dancing. I mean, my wife and I have a dance date set up for tomorrow, but it's not that easy in modern culture to find dance necessarily. Do you know, the fire rhythms at the right place, the right time? It's not like in tribal societies where they're just dancing all the time. We have to set it up, you know?
Right, you have to set up. But what you can do is you can do playful wrestling. Down on your knees on all fours, and you're a big guy, so you have to have a handicap.
Yeah, I don't employ jiu-jitsu and choke my wife out.
Right. But to have her get on top of you if you're on all fours and just squeeze the dickens out of you.
Should love that. Okay, I'll pass that on. Just going to love that. So play fighting, wrestling. We do like to do like 5 minutes of massage when we're really busy. Just like 5 minutes each way is a hell of a lot, because 10 minutes is a hell of a lot better than none in terms of connection.
Right. Touch, pressure, and sometimes a pressure massage, not digging, but squeezing.
Okay.
And using spiral motion. So like if you're working the feet and you kind of spiral through.
Yeah, she likes it when I wring her arms out. She's got these skin arms, I wring them out. She loves that.
Right, and find out the type of touch. Some people who are touch sensitive, you can't get in there to squeeze them, but that's what they need.
Yeah. It's interesting as well that where my wife and I, we're both sort of embodiment kind of people, and so we're able to make sort of requests and we're able to tune in to what we like, but that's quite a big thing for some people, isn't it? They have to discover that, you know. Yeah,
and so what I would say to those people, get a skin brush. You can use a hairbrush that's not too prickly, but ideally they sell them, I guess, on Amazon. They're occupational therapy little brushes, or you could use a shaving brush, but get a brush and brush your own skin. If you're hypersensitive, it's like the skin is the outside of the brain. And if it's on guard or numb, then just brush away. Get a scrubby washcloth and brush the skin.
Yeah, I like that with salt. I was just in a sauna this morning and I was rubbing salt on myself.
Yeah, right? That'll
tearing it off. They have this sort of North African tradition of using kind of pink salt. But okay, we do need to be moving towards wrap up. Sadly, I feel like this is just getting juicy, so I'm enjoying it.
I hope this has given you the ideas of what you wanted for today.
Yeah, well, also, unfortunately, I'm still working for another 4 hours, but I'm going to make a little list. And it has. So in terms of finding out more, before we go to sort of your stuff specifically, is there any other websites or resources for people just that are getting into developmental stuff, or, you know, obviously it's the BMC site?
Anything with a body-mind centering base to it was going to have keen resources for developmental stuff. Yeah,
so it could be like Linda Hartley stuff in the UK, and there's other systems out there that are based on it. Yeah,
worldwide now. There's programs in the world for the body psychology aspect. I would say the ABP, like it's the US ABP or the European. The EABP,
Association of Body Psychotherapy,
Body psychotherapies. That's another broad resource that often identifies practitioners. Then I would say, of course, contact improvisation, underground, movement. It'll be fringe, but there are scientists and doctors who show up, once they find the joy of it, they find it. I would say we haven't spoken much about meditation, but the Sufi meditation, they're using mindfulness. Now, the only trouble with the mindfulness, and I've seen this with some of Reggie Ray's work, where it's a dilemma because I get some of his teachers in as clients and they're too busy watching themselves.
Uh-huh.
And if you're watching yourself, you're not moving yourself.
Got it. Yeah, it can get a bit it's almost like being self-creepy, like watching yourself so much. Like if you were to watch another person, it'd be a bit weird, right? It's like, like if you just go to the dance and just watch everyone, it'd be a bit creepy, but it can get, it's like self-creepiness, I call that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But you want something that basically trains the mind to be able to center, to relax. That's why cognitive behavioral therapy became popular now, because you were working with thinking. But the real thinking goes back to the infant identity beliefs. Obsessive thinking, self-attack thinking, doubt, all those things live in the pre and perinatal depression.
Yeah.
There's a thing like infant depression.
Annie, I'm sorry to stop you, but we really need to wrap this up fairly soon, as much as anything, because my bladder's totally full. So,
birthpsychology.com.
Okay, so in terms of finding out more about you, your website is Annie Brook. That's ANNIE, Brook without the E at the end, BROOK.com, right?
Yeah, yep. And I love creating resources that people can actually apply practices and share with their friends and create community around doing this stuff.
You've got some books out, and if people are lucky enough to be anywhere near Boulder, you've got various training courses I can see out there too.
And I do have an online course that takes people through the Birth's Hidden Legacy books. So if they want that in-depth support at the early psychology, we're trying to make it available.
Annie,
so
this is Keith. Do you have a parting message about the body for all our listeners to finish with?
I would say find the real pleasure of who you are.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Great to meet you.
Subscribe to get more. And you can also leave us a review on iTunes, which helps with our rankings. So really appreciate that. Equally, if you want to support the podcast even more, then fund us. Go to Patreon. Give us $1 per episode. Those who don't know, Patreon's a really good way of supporting things you want to see more of in the world. I know so much is available for free now, and what I'd say is a lot of energy and effort goes into this podcast. I put it out there for free so everyone can get it. Maud and I work on this. Everyone that wants it can have it for free. And if you want to support us, it is really appreciated. So it's patreon.com/Mark Walsh. And of course, if you want any in-person training, you can visit embodiedfacilitator.com. There's loads more resources there too.
Till next time, welcome home to the body.